What is instructional design? Instructional design is more than simply creating instruction. It is actually a vehicle for us to analyze human performance problems in a systematic fashion while identifying the root cause, and the goal is to implement solutions while minimizing the unintended consequences of corrective action. This means to say you have to try to anticipate not only what the gaps are that need to be dealt with regard to the performance problem, but you also have to try to anticipate the possible unintended consequences, both positive and negative, mostly negative, that might result from a poor design. However, I would caution you that mistakes do happen, which is why the word minimize is pretty critical here in terms of looking at the process. Instructional design also includes selection of instruction modalities, methods, strategies, technologies, and tools, as well as management solutions. And a big part of understanding when training is the answer is to also know how to determine when training is not, in fact, the answer. That is a situation where you could apply the old adage that you are throwing good money after bad. In other words, training wasn't the answer in the first place to the performance problem. Rather, maybe it resided in issues of motivation, employee engagement, lack of tools, management issues on the day-to-day basis on the front lines. So you have to fully understand the scope of what it is that you're dealing with before you can even determine that training is a possible answer to fix the problem. Instructional design is important to us for a number of reasons that we've already talked about, including the fact that instructional design is an emerging profession. And like any emerging profession, there are a lot of levels of bleed over in and out from other professions. Quality comes to mind, lean, lots of different types of managerial issues from the theoretical to the applied. And so there is, from time to time, a varying degree of differences in application when one looks at the professions that are considered to be instructional design. Elements of instructional design can be owned by a number of different stakeholders, and so it's not one of those things that you can purely apply as a very well-rounded within-scope definition of what the job entails. It may mean something different to company A as opposed to company B, and there may be a completely different set of parameters for performance. Instructional design also establishes and maintains effective human performance, as I just mentioned. We'll talk about that a little bit more. It's guided by models. There are a number of models that you've already talked about, probably most commonly known as the ADDIE model, but there are dozens of other models that can be applied depending upon the situation. And these models don't differ a whole lot in terms of the theory. It's a matter of looking at the problem and saying, well, this model with these 4 steps seems to suit our parameters and looks like it might be applicable and easily applied to our situation, whereas someone else might look at a 7-step model and say this more adequately suits our needs. Regardless, there are a number of things to choose from. Again, instructional design is systematic, and so you have a stepwise, linear way of looking at problems to get to a solution. And instructional design is based on an open systems theory, which I'll discuss a little bit more. It's important to understand a very generic, broad-based concept of what open systems theory is, because when you're looking at a problem, you should look at it from a systemic standpoint, and this is what Peter Senge talked about in his 1990 book when he talked about the learning organization. There was a lot of attention brought to systems thinking in different interdisciplinary applications subsequent to his work, and it seems to have really stood the test of time. If you have a chance, that might be a good resource for you to pick up, and if you can't have the whole thing in front of you, reading excerpts is still a very good idea. Instructional design is also oriented to finding and applying solutions through human ingenuity. And this is something that I find particularly intriguing, because when we start talking about technology and how technology interfaces with the types of things that we do on a daily basis, we could invariably go out and find a number of different tools that technology has provided solutions to problems for, but are those tools appropriate for our environment, for the people who will need to use them, for their education level, for their expertise level? All of those things can be creatively solved. However, is it appropriate on the back end as it is on the front end? So sometimes coming up with a very creative and innovation-based solution is a great thing, but it has to be applicable to the people who are going to ultimately have to deploy the tools. So when we talk about performance issues in connection with performance improvement, we have to first understand what performance is. In a very broad and overly general perspective, performance is the achievement of results. And what this means is the outcomes, or the ends, to which the purposeful activities, the means, are directed, encompasses achievements, which is performance. So we're talking about inputs and outputs, essentially. There's a glimpse into your open systems theory in a broad-based way. Performance is not the same as behavior, and I think that that's very important to understand, especially when you start to look at some of these other very difficult to measure workplace dynamics, such as engagement. Behavior is tantamount to the observable actions taken and the unobservable decisions made to achieve work results. These are the things that are difficult to quantify. Behaviors lead into performance and sometimes can encompass nuances of a variety of things: corporate culture, corporate environment, what is the climate, which is different than the culture, and what are the managerial issues as well. Any of these things can affect one to another in somewhat of a domino effect way if you're not aware of how they might interact. So behaviors do comprise part of performance, but they are not performance in and of themselves. So in performance management, we have to look at the concept of efficiency and effectiveness. And to be efficient is not to say that you're going to be effective, or to be effective is not to say you're going to be efficient. I have seen process designs that were highly inefficient, yet still effective somehow despite themselves, and also effective process designs that were terribly inefficient. So efficiency asks the question, are we doing things right? And this is to say, what is the ratio between the resources needed to achieve the results, your inputs, and the value of the results, outputs? Sometimes when things are conceptualized, the phrase, "it seemed like a good idea at the time," comes into play, and a good idea that is launched turns out to be a real counterproductive endeavor. And I think the real intelligent business is one that can say, we tried it, we took a risk, it wasn't what we thought it would be, and we need to pull this initiative for whatever reason. Probably the biggest thing is to say, is this the hill to die on? And there's nothing wrong with taking calculated risks after due diligence within a business environment. However, to continue down the path of something that is neither efficient nor effective is certainly a sign of your inability to thrive and survive in a competitive strategic environment. Effectiveness asks, are we doing the right things? And this is the match between the results achieved and those needed or desired. So you can see the difference between, are we doing things right, which would speak to the microprocesses, and are we doing the right things, which might speak to how are we satisfying the requirements of our stakeholders. That would be shareholders, management, employees, customers, any of those people throughout the sphere of what you would look at in terms of a stakeholder situation.